The last thing I remembered was the screeching of brakes and the sickening crunch of metal against bone. I was just another overworked literature professor rushing across the street, my mind consumed with grading papers about Shakespeare's greatest tragedy. How ironic that Romeo and Juliet would be the last thing on my mind before I died. But death, it turns out, has a twisted sense of humor. I jolted awake to the sound of lutes and the rustle of silk. My eyes flew open to ornate stone walls draped in rich tapestries. This wasn't a hospital. This wasn't anywhere I recognized. Lady Rosalind, you've been unconscious for hours. We feared the worst when you collapsed in the market. I turned toward the voice, a young woman in a servant's dress, her face creased with worry. Lady Rosalind. I looked down at my hands. Pale, delicate, adorned with rings I'd never seen before. My reflection in a nearby mirror showed a face that wasn't mine, beautiful, with dark curls and green eyes that seemed to hold secrets. My heart hammered as the impossible truth crashed over me. I was in Renaissance Verona. I was Lady Rosalind Capulet, Juliet's older cousin who died of fever before the events of the play. And if the calendar on the wall was correct, I had exactly 3 days before Romeo Montague drank poison in Juliet's tomb. Marta, I said, testing the name that somehow felt natural on my tongue. Send word to the Montague house. Tell them Lady Rosalind requests an urgent meeting with Romeo. Marta's face went white. My lady, you cannot possibly. The feud between our families. The feud is about to destroy everything. I stood, my mind racing. In my previous life, I'd analyzed this story from every angle. I knew every plot point, every tragic misstep. I need to see him today. But Lady Rosalind, your father will. My father won't know. I moved to the window, gazing out at the bustling streets of Verona. Somewhere out there, Romeo was falling deeper in love with Juliet, unaware that their secret marriage would lead to their deaths in mere days. Tell me, has young Juliet been acting strangely lately? Marta nodded eagerly. Oh yes, she's been sneaking about, speaking in riddles, and just yesterday I caught her kissing her own hand while staring at the moon. Too late. They were already married. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. A young man entered, tall, broad-shouldered, with kind eyes and an easy smile. My heart skipped, but not from recognition of the character. This was someone new, someone who shouldn't exist in Shakespeare's story. Cousin Rosalind, he said warmly. I heard you'd taken ill. I brought physician's herbs from my travels in Mantua. And you are? His smile faltered slightly. Lorenzo Capulet, your cousin from Florence. We met at your coming-of-age celebration 2 years ago? He studied my face with growing concern. The fever must have affected your memory. Lorenzo, another Capulet. In my professor life, I'd memorized every character in the play, every family tree. He didn't exist in Shakespeare's version, which meant this world had already changed somehow. But why? Of course, I said quickly. Forgive me, I'm still recovering. Lorenzo, I need your help with something that will sound impossible. Anything for family. I took a deep breath. Romeo Montague is going to die in 3 days unless we stop him. Lorenzo's hand moved instinctively to his sword. If that Montague boy has threatened you? No, I grabbed his arm. He hasn't threatened anyone. But he's in love with Juliet, and their love will destroy them both unless we intervene. The color drained from Lorenzo's face. Juliet? But she's only 14. 15, and she's already married him in secret. Lorenzo sank into a chair, running his hands through his dark hair. Madonna mia! Uncle Capulet will slaughter them both when he finds out. And he's already promised her to Count Paris. Which is exactly why Romeo will drink poison thinking Juliet is dead, and why Juliet will stab herself when she wakes to find his corpse. I began pacing, my professor instincts taking over. Unless we change the story. You speak as if you've seen the future. I met his eyes. In a way, I have. Lorenzo, do you trust me? He studied my face for a long moment. You're different, Rosalind. There's something in your eyes I've never seen before, like you've lived 100 lives. But yes, I trust you. Then help me save them. All of them. As if summoned by our conversation, another knock came at the door. Marta peeked in, her face flushed with excitement and terror. My lady, she whispered urgently. Romeo Montague is here. He's asking to speak with you privately. My heart stopped. Romeo was here? This early in the timeline? What had I already changed? Send him in, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Lorenzo stood. Rosalind, this is madness. Trust me. The door opened and Romeo Montague stepped into my chambers. But this wasn't the lovesick boy from the play. This Romeo was older, sharper, with eyes that held pain and determination. He was devastatingly handsome in a way that made my breath catch. But more than that, he moved like a man who'd seen battle, who'd lost everything and found it again. "Lady Rosalind," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We need to talk. About Juliet. About the poison. And about why you're the only person in Verona who seems to know we're all going to die." The room fell silent. Lorenzo's hand was back on his sword, but he waited, watching me. Romeo knew. Somehow, impossibly, Romeo knew. "How?" I whispered. He smiled grimly. "Because this isn't my first time living through this nightmare either." The world tilted on its axis. Romeo Montague, my Romeo, the Romeo I'd come to save, was staring at me with eyes that held the same impossible knowledge burning in my own. "You're—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "A literature professor from 2024 who died in a car accident while thinking about the greatest love story ever written?" Romeo's mouth quirked into a bitter smile. "No, that would be you, Dr. Sarah Chen. I'm Dr. Marcus Webb, Shakespeare scholar from Oxford. I died of a heart attack in my office while grading papers on tragic irony." My legs gave out. Lorenzo caught me as I sank toward the floor, his concerned voice seeming to come from miles away. But I couldn't focus on anything except Romeo's, Marcus's, familiar academic tone, wrapped in a Renaissance nobleman's voice. "This is impossible," I breathed. "Tell me about it. I've been reliving these 3 days for what feels like months now." Romeo moved closer, and I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. "Every time I try to save Juliet, something goes wrong. The first time, I simply told her the truth, that I knew she'd fake her death. She thought I'd gone mad. The second time, I tried to stop the fake death plan entirely. Juliet threw herself from her balcony instead." "How many times?" Lorenzo asked sharply. We both looked at him in surprise. "How many times have you lived these days?" Romeo's laugh was hollow. "You can understand us? You're not supposed to be able to." "I'm not from your time either," Lorenzo said quietly. "Dr. Lorenzo Medici, professor of Renaissance history at the University of Florence. I died in 2024 during a lecture about the historical accuracy of Romeo and Juliet. Heart attack, same as you." The room spun. 3 literature professors, all dead, all reborn into the story we dedicated our lives to studying. "But why?" "There's something else," Romeo continued, his eyes locked on mine. "I'm not just Romeo. I'm also Count Paris." "What?" The word exploded from my lips. "Every other loop, I switch between them. I've experienced loving Juliet as Romeo, and I've experienced being the man she's forced to marry as Paris. I've felt both sides of the tragedy." His voice cracked. "And every time, no matter what I do, she dies. You all die." Lorenzo sank into a chair. "Madonna mia, how many loops, Romeo?" 47. The number hit like a physical blow. 47 times watching Juliet die. 47 times failing to save the girl whose love story had captivated the world for centuries. "But you're here now," I said desperately. "Something's different this time." "You," Romeo said simply. "You're what's different. In every other loop, Rosalind was already dead from fever. But this time—" He studied my face with an intensity that made my cheeks burn. "This time I have a partner who understands the story as well as I do." "The 3 of us," Lorenzo corrected. "And I think I know why we're here." We turned to him. Lorenzo was pale but determined, his historian's mind clearly working through the implications. In our world, Romeo and Juliet was Shakespeare's most beloved tragedy. But what if it was never meant to be a tragedy? What if the real story was lost, corrupted over time? He leaned forward. "What if we're here to write the true ending?" A chill ran down my spine. "You think we're supposed to save them? I think we're supposed to save the story itself." Romeo shook his head. "I've tried everything, Lorenzo. I've stopped the marriage, prevented the duel with Tybalt, sent warning letters to both families." "But you've been trying alone," I interrupted. "Romeo, in all your loops, did you ever try to change Juliet's perspective instead of just the events around her?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" "You've been treating her like a character in a story instead of a real person making real choices. But if we're all here, all professors who studied this tale—" My mind raced. What if the secret isn't changing what happens to her, but changing who she is? "Making her less Juliet-like?" Lorenzo asked slowly. "Making her smarter," I said firmly. "In the original play, Juliet is brilliant but naive. She's 14, isolated, with no real knowledge of the world. But what if she had mentors? What if she had someone teaching her about politics, about family diplomacy, about alternatives to suicide?" Romeo's eyes lit up. "You want to educate her out of tragedy. I want to give her the tools to write her own story instead of being trapped in Shakespeare's." I stood, pacing to the window. "Romeo, when does Tybalt challenge you to the duel?" "Tomorrow at noon in the square." "And when does Juliet's father announce her engagement to Paris?" Tomorrow evening at the feast. One day. We had one day to completely reshape Juliet Capulet's understanding of her own life, before the events that led to tragedy began cascading out of control. It could work, Lorenzo said slowly. But we'd need access to her, and more importantly, we'd need her to trust us. Romeo grimaced. That's the problem. She's so in love, she can barely see past my face. And she certainly won't listen to warnings about our future. Then we don't warn her about the future, I said, the plan crystallizing in my mind. We teach her about the present. About power, politics, family dynamics. We make her too smart to be a victim of circumstance. And how exactly do we get close enough to Juliet Capulet to become her secret tutors? Lorenzo asked. Her father guards her like a treasure. I smiled, feeling the first spark of hope I'd had since awakening in this impossible world. Because I'm her favorite cousin, and she's been sneaking out to meet Romeo anyway. We're going to intercept one of those meetings and make Juliet an offer she can't refuse. Which is the chance to have both love and freedom. The chance to marry Romeo without destroying both their families. The chance to be the heroine of her own story instead of the victim of someone else's. Romeo stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. You know, in 47 loops, no one has ever suggested that maybe Juliet deserved better than a tragic ending. She does deserve better. They all do. I looked between my fellow displaced professors. So let's give it to them. Lorenzo stood, his hand moving to rest on his sword hilt, in a gesture that was becoming familiar. Count me in, but if we're going to do this, we need to move fast. And we need to be careful. We may understand the story, but we're still trapped inside it. One wrong move, and we could make things even worse. Agreed. Romeo moved toward the door. Where do we start? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of destiny and possibility settling on my shoulders. We start by crashing a secret wedding. Romeo's eyebrows shot up. They're already married, remember? I know, but I have a feeling that in this loop, we're going to give them a different kind of wedding gift. I smiled grimly. The truth about what their families are really fighting over, and the key to ending this feud once and for all. As we prepared to leave my chambers and step into a story that had frustrated scholars for centuries, I couldn't help but think about the irony. 3 professors who'd spent their lives analyzing literature were about to become the authors of the most famous rewrite in history. We were going to save Romeo and Juliet. But first, we had to save ourselves. The Montague garden was bathed in moonlight, and I felt like an intruder in my own academic dreams. Here was the famous balcony scene location, but instead of romantic whispers, we were conducting what amounted to a supernatural intervention. Romeo, I was still adjusting to thinking of him as Marcus in Renaissance clothing, led Lorenzo and me through a hidden entrance in the garden wall. His movements were confident, practiced. 47 loops, he murmured, catching my stare. I know every secret passage in Verona by now. We positioned ourselves behind the massive oak tree that dominated the garden's center. From here, we could see both the main house and Juliet's favorite meeting spot, a marble bench surrounded by her grandmother's rose bushes. Are you certain she'll come tonight? Lorenzo whispered. She comes every night, Romeo replied. Even when I don't show up, it's like she's drawn here. I was about to respond when a flash of white caught my eye. Juliet emerged from the shadows, moving with the practiced stealth of someone who'd been sneaking out for weeks. But this wasn't the dreamy-eyed girl from the play. This Juliet moved with purpose, her dark hair braided practically, her dress chosen for climbing, not seduction. She was beautiful, yes, but there was something else, an intelligence in her posture, a wariness in how she checked the garden before settling on the bench. She's different too, I breathed. Romeo nodded grimly. Every loop, she's a little sharper, a little more suspicious. I think the story is trying to fix itself, and she's evolving to survive it. Juliet sat on the bench and pulled something from her dress, a small leather journal. She began writing by moonlight, her hand moving swiftly across the page. What is that? Lorenzo asked. I have no idea. She's never done that before. We watched in fascination as Juliet wrote for several minutes, then tore the page from the journal and folded it carefully. She stood, walked to the base of our oak tree, and pressed the note into a small hollow in the bark. Then she looked directly at our hiding spot. You can come out now, she said calmly. All 3 of you. My heart stopped. Lorenzo's hand flew to his sword. Romeo just sighed. How? He called out as we emerged from behind the tree. Juliet's smile was sharp and knowing. Because I've been dreaming about this conversation for weeks, Romeo Montague. And because you, cousin Rosalind, have been asking very strange questions about my marriage prospects. And you, mysterious Lorenzo, arrived in Verona at exactly the right time to be either a savior or a spy. She gestured for us to join her on the bench. Up close, I could see that her eyes held the same impossible knowledge that haunted the rest of us. You remember? I said. It wasn't a question. Pieces, fragments, dreams that feel more real than waking. Juliet's voice was steady, but I caught the tremor underneath. I dream of drinking poison. I dream of waking up to find Romeo dead beside me. I dream of a dagger sliding between my ribs. Romeo reached for her hand, but she pulled back. No, she said firmly. Not this time. Every time you touch me, I lose my ability to think clearly. And I need to think clearly if we're going to survive this. Juliet, Romeo's voice was pained. I love you. I know you do, and I love you, but love isn't enough to save us. She turned to face all three of us. Tell me the truth, all of it. Who are you really, and why are we trapped in this nightmare? Lorenzo and I exchanged glances. How much should we tell her? We're professors, I said finally. From a time that hasn't happened yet. We studied your story for years before we died and woke up here. My story? Romeo and Juliet, Romeo said quietly. It became one of the most famous love stories ever written. But in the original version, he swallowed hard. We both die. Juliet was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the same calm intelligence she'd shown since we arrived. How many times have you tried to save me? This is attempt 48. And I die every time? Every time. She nodded as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. Then we're approaching this wrong. You're trying to save Juliet the character. But I'm not a character anymore, am I? I'm a real person making real choices. Yes, I said, struck by her clarity. That's exactly what we realized. Good. Juliet stood and began pacing, her mind clearly working through possibilities. Then let's talk strategy. What are the key events that lead to our deaths? Tybalt challenges Romeo to a duel tomorrow, Lorenzo said. Romeo tries to refuse because he's secretly married to you, but Mercutio fights instead and dies. Romeo kills Tybalt in revenge and gets exiled. Which leads to my father promising me to Paris in a rush marriage to console the family after Tybalt's death, Juliet continued. I take the fake death potion. Romeo doesn't get the message explaining the plan, drinks real poison, and I wake up to find him dead. Precisely. Then we need to prevent the duel without revealing our marriage. She turned to Romeo. Can you stay away from the square tomorrow? I've tried that. Tybalt finds me anyway. He's determined to fight. What if Tybalt couldn't fight? I suggested slowly. They all turned to me. What if Tybalt was indisposed tomorrow? Not dead, I added quickly. Just unable to participate in any duels. Juliet's eyes lit up. You want to drug him. I want to give him a reason to stay home that doesn't involve violence or suspicion. A mysterious illness? Lorenzo suggested. Food poisoning from a meal only he ate? Perfect. Juliet was already planning. I can slip something into his wine at dinner tonight. Nothing dangerous, just enough to keep him bedridden tomorrow. Romeo frowned. That only delays the duel. Tybalt will still want satisfaction. Not if the reason for the duel disappears, I interrupted. Romeo, why does Tybalt want to fight you? Because I crashed the Capulet feast uninvited. And why were you there? To see Rosalind, but then I met Juliet. Exactly. You were pursuing a Capulet woman. But what if you publicly declared your intentions towards someone else? Someone outside both families? Like who? I took a deep breath. Like me. The garden fell silent. Romeo stared at me while Juliet's eyebrows shot up. Rosalind, Romeo said carefully. You're a Capulet. That doesn't solve the problem. But I'm not Juliet, I pointed out. I'm older, I have some autonomy, and I've been away from Verona long enough that a sudden romance wouldn't seem impossible. If you were courting me openly, Tybalt's honor wouldn't be insulted by your presence at family events. It's brilliant, Lorenzo said slowly. A fake courtship to provide cover for the real marriage. But it's dangerous, Juliet added. If people believe Romeo is pursuing Rosalind, and then our marriage is discovered, then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, I said firmly. The important thing is buying time to figure out a permanent solution. Juliet studied my face. You're willing to risk your reputation for us? I'm willing to risk everything to save you. All of you. She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her. I can see why the universe chose you to help us. The universe chose all of us, Romeo said quietly. The question is, can we choose each other? Can we trust each other enough to rewrite the most famous tragedy ever written? Juliet moved to the oak tree and retrieved the note she'd hidden earlier. She unfolded it and handed it to me. I've been writing down my dreams, she said. All the ways we die, all the things that go wrong. But also, All the moments where different choices could have changed everything. I read the note by moonlight, and my breath caught. It was a detailed analysis of the play's structure, written in Juliet's careful hand. She'd identified every turning point, every moment where the tragedy could have become a comedy instead. "You've been studying your own story," I said in amazement. "I've been preparing to rewrite it, but I needed collaborators." She looked at each of us in turn. "Are you in?" Romeo smiled, the first genuinely happy expression I'd seen from him. "Lady Juliet, it would be my honor to help you save us all." Lorenzo bowed formally. "Count me in, cousin, but we're going to need more than clever planning. We're going to need allies." "And luck," I added. "And courage," Juliet said, "because tomorrow we start changing history." As we prepared to leave the garden and set our impossible plan in motion, I couldn't help but marvel at how different this felt from Romeo's previous 47 attempts. We weren't just trying to prevent a tragedy anymore. We were writing a completely new story. Dawn broke over Verona like a promise of redemption, and I'd never been more terrified in either of my lives. The plan we'd hatched in the moonlight seemed impossibly ambitious now that I had to actually execute it. Step 1. Drug Tybalt to prevent the duel. Step 2. Publicly announce Romeo's courtship of me. Step 3. Figure out how to end a centuries-old family feud before everything fell apart. No pressure. I found Juliet in the kitchen before breakfast, innocently helping the servants prepare the meal. She caught my eye and nodded toward a small vial hidden in her sleeve. The sleeping draught was ready. "Cousin Rosalind," she called cheerfully. "Come help me with the wine service. Tybalt has such particular tastes." I moved to her side, marveling at her composure. "Are you certain about the dosage?" "Trust me," she murmured, selecting a particular cup from the cupboard. "I've been reading my grandmother's herbal texts. This will give him stomach troubles and dizziness for exactly 1 day." She poured the wine with steady hands, added a few drops from the vial, and swirled it gently. To anyone watching, we were just 2 young women performing morning duties. "Juliet," I said quietly, "are you ready for what comes next?" As ready as anyone can be to watch the man she loves pretend to court her cousin. Her smile was wry but determined. "Just try not to be too convincing, yes?" Before I could respond, heavy footsteps announced Tybalt's arrival. He strode into the kitchen like he owned the world, his sword at his hip and violence in his eyes. "Cousin," he greeted Juliet with genuine affection, then nodded curtly to me. "Rosalind." "Tybalt," Juliet said sweetly, offering him the prepared cup. "Your favorite vintage. Father says you'll need your strength for whatever adventure you're planning today." My heart hammered as Tybalt raised the cup to his lips. Everything depended on this moment. He drank deeply, savoring the wine. "Excellent as always, little cousin. And yes, I have plans today. That Montague dog Romeo has been sniffing around our family long enough. It's time someone taught him respect." "Be careful," Juliet said, and I heard the real fear in her voice. "Montagues should be careful," Tybalt replied with dark satisfaction. I, on the other hand, was born ready for war. He finished the wine and strode out, leaving Juliet and me exchanging worried glances. Would the drug work quickly enough? I had my answer an hour later when Lorenzo found me in the garden. "Tybalt is violently ill," he reported with barely concealed glee. "The whole household thinks he ate bad fish. He can barely stand, let alone duel." "Perfect. And Romeo?" "Waiting for your signal to begin the performance." I took a deep breath. "Then let's rewrite history." The market square was bustling with morning activity when I arrived, Lorenzo at my side playing the role of protective cousin. Romeo was there too, examining fruit at a vendor's stall with studied casualness. It was time for the most important acting performance of any of my lives. "Romeo Montague," I called out, my voice carrying across the square. He turned, and I had to admire his skill. His face lit up with exactly the right mixture of surprise and delight, as if seeing me was an unexpected gift. "Lady Rosalind," he said, approaching with a courtly bow. "What a pleasant surprise." "Is it?" I asked, letting a hint of flirtation enter my voice. "Or have you been hoping to encounter me again since our conversation yesterday?" The crowd around us was starting to take notice. "Perfect." "I confess," Romeo said, his voice carrying just far enough to be overheard, "I have been thinking of little else." "How shocking," I replied with mock surprise. "A Montague thinking of a Capulet. Whatever would your family say?" "They would say that matters of the heart recognize no family names." It was a good line, romantic enough to convince eavesdroppers, political enough to plant seeds of possibility in the minds of both family supporters. "And what of my family?" I asked. "Surely you know the risks of pursuing a Capulet daughter?" Romeo stepped closer, close enough that the watching crowd would see intimacy but not hear our words. The greatest risks, he said quietly, yield the greatest rewards. And you, Lady Rosalind, are worth any risk. I felt heat rise in my cheeks and had to remind myself this was all performance. Romeo, Marcus, was a very good actor. You speak prettily, I said. But pretty words are easy. What would you sacrifice for my regard? Name it. The crowd was hanging on our every word now. I could see merchants abandoning their stalls to get closer, housewives whispering behind their hands, young men grinning at the romantic drama unfolding before them. Your family's honor, I said clearly. Would you sacrifice that? For you, without hesitation. And if I asked you to renounce the feud entirely? To seek peace instead of vengeance? Romeo's eyes met mine, and I saw understanding flash between us. This wasn't just about creating a fake courtship anymore. We were planting the idea of peace itself. If Lady Rosalind Capulet asked me to choose love over hatred, Romeo said, his voice ringing across the square, I would choose love every time. A murmur ran through the crowd. Someone shouted approval. Someone else called out a joke about Montagues going soft. But the seed was planted. Then prove it, I said, extending my hand. Dance with me at tonight's feast, in front of both our families. Show Verona that a Montague and a Capulet can share something other than blood. Romeo took my hand and raised it to his lips, placing a gentle kiss on my knuckles. The crowd cheered. It would be my honor, he said. As we stood there, hands clasped in the center of Verona's market square, I felt the story shifting around us. This wasn't in Shakespeare's play. This moment, this choice, this public declaration of peace over war, it was entirely new. Think it worked? Romeo murmured. Look around, I replied. The crowd was already dispersing, but I could see the excitement in their faces. They weren't just witnessing a romance. They were witnessing the possibility of change. And in a city where the old feuds had defined everything for generations, change was intoxicating. What now? Lorenzo asked as he rejoined us. Now we prepare for the real performance, I said. Tonight's feast, where we'll find out if Verona is ready for a love story that doesn't end in death. Romeo smiled grimly. No pressure at all. As we walked back toward the Capulet house, I caught sight of a figure watching us from an upper window, Juliet. Even from this distance, I could see the mixture of hope and terror on her face. We'd bought ourselves time and created a plausible cover story. But the real test was still to come. Tonight, we would dance in front of both families and prove that love could conquer hatred. Or we'd discover that some stories are too powerful to rewrite. The great hall of the Capulet house had been transformed into something from a fairy tale, but I felt like I was walking into a trap. Hundreds of candles cast dancing shadows on the walls. Musicians filled the air with lively melodies, and the cream of Verona society mingled in their finest clothes. And somewhere in this glittering crowd, the future of 2 families and 4 displaced souls would be decided. I stood at the top of the grand staircase, wearing a gown of deep emerald silk that Lorenzo had somehow procured. It was beautiful enough to turn heads, but practical enough to fight in if necessary. Because despite all our planning, I had the distinct feeling this evening would end in violence. Breathe, Juliet murmured beside me. She looked radiant in cream and gold, every inch the perfect Capulet daughter. You look terrified. I am terrified. What if this doesn't work? What if we make everything worse? Then at least we'll go down fighting. Her smile was fierce. Besides, look. I followed her gaze to the far side of the hall, where Romeo stood with several other young Montagues. He was dressed in midnight blue that made his eyes seem darker, and when he caught sight of me, his face lit up with such convincing adoration that several nearby guests followed his gaze. He's a better actor than I expected, I admitted. He's not acting, Juliet said quietly. I turned to stare at her. What do you mean? I mean that Marcus inside Romeo has been looking at you the way Romeo looks at me. All morning, all afternoon. Her smile was knowing. Our fake courtship may be more real than you think. Before I could process this revelation, Lorenzo appeared at my elbow. Uncle Capulet is about to make the announcement about Tybalt, he murmured. Are you ready? I nodded, though my heart was hammering. This was the moment we'd find out if our deception had worked. Lord Capulet climbed onto the small platform where the musicians played, raising his hands for attention. The hall gradually fell silent. Friends, family, honored guests, he began, his voice carrying easily across the room. Tonight we celebrate not just another feast, but the continuing strength of the Capulet name. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. However, Capulet continued, I must share sad news. My nephew Tybalt has been struck down by a sudden illness and cannot join us tonight. Concerned murmurs filled the hall. I caught Romeo's eye across the room and saw relief flash across his face. But Capulet's voice rose again. Tonight also brings cause for celebration. It seems love has found its way into our house in the most unexpected form. My stomach dropped. This wasn't part of the plan. My niece, the lovely Rosalind, has apparently captured the heart of a most surprising suitor. Capulet's eyes found mine, and I saw calculation in his gaze. Romeo Montague has formally requested permission to court her. The hall erupted. Half the guests looked shocked, the other half delighted by the scandal. I felt every eye in the room turn to me, and forced myself to smile serenely despite my panic. Romeo had actually asked for permission? When? How? And, Capulet continued, raising his voice over the noise, in the spirit of exploring new possibilities for peace between our families, I have granted that permission. The explosion of sound was deafening. Shouts of approval mixed with cries of outrage. I saw several Montagues look like they wanted to draw swords, while some Capulets seemed thrilled by the romantic drama. Furthermore, Capulet called out, young Romeo will join us tonight to dance with my niece, as a gesture of good faith between our houses. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as Romeo began making his way across the hall toward me. His face was calm, but I could see tension in every line of his body. When he reached me, he bowed deeply. Lady Rosalind, he said formally, would you honor me with a dance? I placed my hand in his, hyper-aware of every watching eye. The honor is mine, Lord Romeo. As he led me onto the dance floor, I whispered urgently, when did you ask my uncle for permission? This afternoon, he murmured back. I had to make it real, or someone would have called our bluff. You could have warned me. Would you have said yes if I had? Before I could answer, the music began, a stately pavane that would allow for conversation while keeping us in the center of attention. This is either brilliant or catastrophic, I said as we began the formal steps. Both, probably. Romeo's smile was rueful. But look around us. I did and gasped. The Montagues and Capulets weren't clustering in separate groups as they usually did. They were mingling, talking, watching us with fascination instead of hatred. They want this to work, Romeo said quietly. Both families are tired of the bloodshed. We're giving them permission to hope. And if hope isn't enough? Then we improvise. The dance brought us closer together, and I found myself studying Romeo's face. Juliet was right. There was something in his eyes that went beyond performance. Marcus, I said softly, using his real name. Are you falling for you? Yes. His honesty was startling. I know it's insane. I know we're in the middle of a complex deception involving my wife and your cousin. But I can't help it. Romeo. I know you feel it too. The way you look at me, the way you trust me. Sarah, I think we were meant to find each other in this story. The dance spun us apart before I could respond, and when we came back together, I saw something that made my blood freeze. A man in dark clothing was pushing through the crowd toward us, his hand on his sword. He was young, well-dressed, and completely unfamiliar. Romeo, I said urgently, we have a problem. He followed my gaze and swore under his breath. That's Count Paris. Paris? But he's not supposed to appear until after. I stopped. We changed the timeline. Of course, other changes would follow. Paris reached the edge of the dance floor and called out in a voice that carried across the music. Lord Capulet, I must protest this arrangement. The music stuttered to a halt. Every eye in the room turned to the young count. I have had your permission to court Lady Juliet, Paris continued, his voice ringing with indignation. How can you now offer hospitality to my rival house while I stand by like a fool? Oh no, we'd forgotten that Paris was supposed to be Juliet's suitor. By creating a romance between Romeo and me, we'd inadvertently threatened his engagement. Lord Capulet looked furious at the public challenge to his authority. Romeo tensed beside me, ready to fight. And somewhere in the crowd, I caught sight of Juliet's pale face. Count Paris, Capulet said coldly, you forget yourself. Do I? Paris stepped onto the dance floor, his hand still on his sword. Or perhaps it's you who forgets. My family has been patient, my lord. But patience has limits. The hall was silent now, everyone sensing the potential for violence. Your family, Romeo said quietly, but his voice carried. And what family is that, Count Paris? The family that will rule Verona when the old feuds finally destroy both yours and the Capulets, Paris replied with a cold smile. I felt the pieces click into place with horrible clarity. Paris wasn't just a suitor, he was a political player, someone who benefited from the Montague-Capulet conflict. And our attempt at peace threatened his plans. You want the feud to continue? I said aloud. I want Verona to be ruled by those fit to rule it, Paris replied. Not by star-crossed lovers playing at diplomacy. Romeo stepped protectively in front of me. Choose your words carefully, Count. I choose them very carefully indeed. Paris drew his sword in one smooth motion. I challenge you, Romeo Montague, for the insult to my honor and the honor of my betrothed. I am not your betrothed. Juliet's voice rang out across the hall. Everyone turned. She stood at the edge of the crowd, magnificent in her fury. I am not your betrothed, she repeated, moving forward with regal grace. Nor will I ever be. I choose my own fate, Count Paris. And I choose peace. She walked directly to Romeo and me, took our joined hands in both of hers, and turned to face the assembled crowd. Let Verona choose, she said clearly. War and hatred, or love and peace, the old way or a new one. The hall erupted again, but this time it was different. This time, people were cheering. Paris looked around wildly, realizing he'd lost control of the moment. This isn't over, he snarled, sheathing his sword. Yes, I said, stepping forward, it is. Because I finally understood what we were really fighting. Not fate, not tragedy, not even family hatred. We were fighting the people who profited from keeping Verona at war. And for the first time since this began, I knew we could win. The feast dissolved into chaos after Paris's challenge, but it was the good kind of chaos, the kind that comes when old certainties crumble and new possibilities emerge. Guests clustered in excited groups, debating the evening's revelations while musicians played gamely on, despite no one dancing. I found myself in Lord Capulet's private study along with Romeo, Juliet, Lorenzo, and a handful of family elders from both sides. The impromptu gathering had formed naturally as the evening wound down, but I suspected it would prove more important than any formal negotiation. So, said Lord Montague, Romeo's father, studying our little group with shrewd eyes. My son wishes to court a Capulet, and my future daughter-in-law wishes to reject Count Paris. Meanwhile, a mysterious cousin arrives just in time to prevent a duel, and young Juliet speaks of choosing peace like a seasoned diplomat. He leaned back in his chair. Either this is the most remarkable coincidence in Verona's history, or there's more to this story than romantic impulse. The adults around the table nodded agreement. We'd managed to prevent the immediate tragedy, but we'd also attracted attention to ourselves in ways we hadn't anticipated. Sometimes, said Lady Capulet quietly, the young see possibilities that escape their elders. And sometimes, Lord Montague replied, the young meddle in affairs beyond their understanding. I felt the moment balanced on a knife's edge. We could tell the truth and risk being declared mad, or we could continue the deception and risk making a mistake that brought down everything we'd built. Romeo made the choice for all of us. Father, he said formally, what I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but I ask that you hear me out completely before you respond. He looked around the table, meeting every pair of eyes. We know about Count Paris's true intentions because we know how this story is supposed to end. We know about the feud's resolution because we've lived through it before. We know these things because we're not entirely who we appear to be. Silence stretched taut. Then Lord Capulet laughed, a harsh, disbelieving sound. Romeo Montague, are you claiming to be a prophet? A seer? Some sort of mystic? I'm claiming to be a man who has lived the same 3 days 48 times, watching everyone I care about die, until I was given the chance to change things. The laughter died. Explain, Lady Montague said quietly. So we did. We told them everything. Our deaths in 2024, our expertise in literature, the time loops, the original tragic ending, and our desperate attempts to rewrite the story. We told them about Paris's political maneuvering and the forces that profited from keeping Verona at war. When we finished, the room was silent for a long time. Finally, Lady Capulet spoke. 48 attempts? 47 failures, Romeo confirmed. Until now. And in the original story, all the young people die? All of them, Juliet said softly. Romeo, Juliet, Mercutio, Tybalt, Paris. The feud consumes an entire generation. Lord Montague was studying Romeo with new eyes. The dreams, he said suddenly. You've been having strange dreams for weeks. Dreams of fighting, of death, of futures that felt more real than the present. You remember too? Romeo asked, startled. Fragments, images, a growing certainty that something terrible was approaching. Montague looked around the table. And you've all felt it? Nods around the room. The parents had been experiencing echoes of the loops, residual memories bleeding through from each repetition. Then it's true, Lady Capulet said. Somehow, impossibly, it's true. The question, Lorenzo said, is what we do with that knowledge. Lord Capulet leaned forward. You said Count Paris represents political forces that benefit from our feud. What forces? Foreign interests, I replied. Neighboring cities that prefer a divided Verona to a united one. trading companies that profit from the instability. Anyone who gains power when the established families are too busy fighting each other to notice outside manipulation. And Paris is their agent? Paris is their candidate for ruler when both your families destroy each other, Romeo said grimly. He doesn't want to marry Juliet for love or even for alliance. He wants to marry into the Capulet name so he can claim legitimacy when he seizes power. Over our dead bodies, Lord Montague said quietly. Exactly, Juliet replied. Over our literal dead bodies. That's what we're trying to prevent. Lady Montague stood and moved to the window, gazing out at the night-dark city. 48 times, she murmured. 48 times you watched us all die, and still you came back to try again. We didn't have a choice, I said. We love this story. We love these people. We couldn't let it end in tragedy when there was even the smallest chance we could save it. She turned back to us, and I saw tears in her eyes. Then we won't let you fail this time. The words hung in the air like a vow. What do you need from us? Lord Capulet asked. Alliance, Romeo said immediately. Public, formal, unbreakable alliance between the houses. Something Paris can't counter or exploit. And protection, Lorenzo added. He'll try to eliminate the threats to his plan. That means us, but also anyone else who might unite the families. Consider it done, Lord Montague said. But I want something in return. We waited. I want the real marriage, he said, looking at Romeo and Juliet. Not the secret ceremony that leaves room for doubt and manipulation. I want my son to marry this remarkable young woman with both families' blessing, in the cathedral, with all Verona watching. Juliet's face lit up. You would do that? My dear, Lady Capulet said gently. After tonight's revelations, I think we owe you rather more than one proper wedding. 2 weddings, Lord Capulet corrected with a sly smile. Because unless I'm much mistaken, we'll be celebrating another union quite soon. He was looking at Romeo and me, and I felt heat rise in my cheeks. Father, Romeo protested, Rosalind and I aren't. Romeo, I interrupted quietly. Yes, we are. The room fell silent again, but this time it was the good kind of silence. Are you certain? He asked, searching my face. I've never been more certain of anything, I replied. In either life. The smile that spread across his face was brilliant enough to light the room. Then we have a double wedding to plan, Lady Montague said with satisfaction, and a count to deal with. About that, Lorenzo said, I have some ideas. As our unlikely alliance began planning Paris's downfall and the future of Verona, I caught Juliet's eye across the table. She smiled at me with pure joy, and I realized we'd done something that 47 previous attempts couldn't achieve. We hadn't just saved the story, we'd made it better.